Welcome to this episode of the Strong Kind Podcast. This episode is with Angus Bradley. Angus is a strength coach, personal trainer, really funny and intelligent human. We had a great talk, got into some weeds, got out of those weeds. Overall, had just a really fun time. Check it out. Find it on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Let me know how it hits you. Please give me a review. And thanks for tuning in. So we'll jump right in because, like, how going through your mentorship, like, I mean, how you've pieced stuff together and like made stuff that honestly I've thrown out. I had thrown out some models because I'm like, this isn't that useful. That you kind of brought back into things that, and it's like helped me. But I also think what is really interesting is like people like, do you know who Bill Hartman is? You know who Bill Hartman is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, okay, I don't really know a ton about that guy, but like he's like gone super deep into like, infrasternal angles, right? And it's like I don't want to ever be that guy. Like I don't want to go that deep in anything, right? So like
Yeah.
how do you kind of reconcile some of this stuff?
Yeah, this is something I was actually interviewing Jake Tura for my podcast. And it was one of the questions my co-host asked him because he's a fellow rabbit hole enjoyer, who was sort of, gone down a lot of these compression expansion rabbit holes. He's down a huge tendon rabbit hole. And, what we often find, it's that bell curve or sort of Dunning-Kruger journey through. You go down the rabbit hole, you start to become overwhelmed by the complexities of it all. But then when you come back out the other end of it, you're sort of boiling it down to simple heuristics. And then, but I also think there's a lot of people who follow people like myself and Jake Tura, and they almost fall into then this like nihilistic attitude. It's like, oh, none of this stuff matters because they see that a lot of these models are reductionist and they all have flaws to them. But I still think that there's some things that I've gained from like falling down the infrasternal angle rabbit hole. I was a huge compression expansion enjoyer. I still am, but again, it's uh I think we have similar reactions and like we cringe at the way that some people who also enjoy these models discuss them and apply them. I'm assuming in a face-to-face context as well. Obviously, we're just consuming their content. But I think I find the wide ISA and the narrow ISA archetypes really, really useful for my coaching model, especially when it comes to my technical model, especially for Olympic weightlifting and things like that. Where I think people have gone really wrong is they boil someone entirely down to their infrasternal angle. And I'm sure, as you know, and hopefully most of the people listening to this know, or if you don't, people are so much more complex than their infrasternal angle. Having said that, I still think it's a massive influence on what we can expect to see from someone's movement strategies. And where that comes particularly relevant um, is, like I said, when you're doing a sport like weightlifting. I also think this is a thing in track and field, especially with my experience learning how to sprint. A lot of coaches think that there's one technical model of movement. And you kind of do have to have this theoretical gold standard, but often the technical model in each sport is based around the people who are the best at that sport and the people who are built for it. But not all of us are only getting athletes who are perfectly designed in terms of their morphology for the sports that they're choosing. And I think a lot of those people, it gives you a systematic way of understanding where someone might deviate from the stereotypical technical model of their sport. And but because a lot of people would be like, we'll just tell people to do what feels right or tell them to do whatever. But that can kind of be like the ISA archetypes give me a framework for giving someone some assumptions into where they might likely deviate from that technical standard. And that was a long rambling answer, so we can go into some of the specifics of it if you want.
Well, like, so I think because what I hear from you is what I think I struggle with sometimes, and it's even like it comes out in my content creation, and like comes out, and sometimes I'm just like you just got to do it long enough to like when it comes to like the pain science and the fact that like even my post today is just coming to mind because I just like literally posted it a little bit ago. It's like people you if you go down if you want a diagnosis, like we will find it for you, right? Like so you're gonna find it from somebody, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like it could be helpful to like for somebody to, I think, did me and you talk about this? Like maybe in your mentorship, like for somebody to be like, yeah, like you don't drive your knee up when you sprint, or you don't pull your knee up when you sprint, and like giving somebody something to do can be beneficial, right? But it doesn't mean that's the only way, and it doesn't mean that it was actually that helpful, right? And that's
Yeah,
kind of what we like. You have to like have some heuristics, like some guidelines, but then you also have to realize that at certain points, like those are probably not gonna like hold up for very long, right? So
yeah,
I think in like you also have gone through this trajectory of like multiple fields, and then you came into personal training and coaching, and you're kind of like you're able to like not drink the Kool-Aid as fast, and I think there's like some utility in that, right? But you still have to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. um
what I was specifically about to say is like I feel like I actually am a Kool-Aid enjoyer. I'm just drinking so many different forms of Kool-Aid that it does come out as something somewhat authentic to at least my own original perspective once it's all been distilled through. I know I always try to distill every bit of information I come into contact with in the fitness industry through my sort of own personal principles and worldview.
so this is I want to get into the gait cycle, and like, but this will come after this. Okay, so like what? Because I freaking love CrossFit, right? I do. I think it's one of my hard parts of like is like, okay, just open a CrossFit gym, because it's gotten so many people like access to fitness and stuff, but I also just don't want to like, there's aspects of it that are not cool, in my opinion. And I've coached CrossFit, I've coached classes, I enjoy it. But I think the thing that you've struck a really good chord with the train variously GPP mentality is like the fact that you still have structured training, right? But it's like just expressing physical qualities as opposed to just making up random bullshit and doing it 5 times a week, right? So how did you come to that conclusion? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just naturally sort of drawn into it. It's funny that you mentioned the similarities with CrossFit, and I definitely have a lot of respect for CrossFit. I used to make a lot of fun of it, but at the end of the day, it's what exposed me to weightlifting back in the day, and it was my gateway drug into that. But also, when people ask me how I train and I describe it to them, I just train a bit of everything. The most common response I get is, "Oh, so you do CrossFit?" I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I don't do WODs," because that's as much as they say that CrossFit is training a bit of everything, and it is certainly training variously in some way. Like I do think it falls under that bracket, but to me, CrossFit is a very specific thing. It's the Metcons, and it has a stereotypical sort of structure to it. You would, as much as it's training variously, when you sign up to CrossFit, you have expectations that you're going to be doing barbell cycling, high rep Olympic weightlifting. I don't think there's anything wrong with high rep Olympic weightlifting. I absolutely hate high rep Olympic weightlifting. What got me excited about Olympic weightlifting is just heavy singles. So that's how I program a big part of my focus of how I integrate weightlifting into my GPP or training variously. I love gymnastics. I hate kipping pull-ups. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I love that people love their kipping pull-ups. I don't think that you need to learn a strict pull-up before you earn your kipping pull-ups. I just don't like doing kipping pull-ups. So, but again, there is a gymnastics component in my training variously. I love my conditioning, but I don't like doing metcons. I love doing my surfing and like actually playing sport for that side of things and getting my interval side of the training. So did I answer you? What was the actual question? What's the difference
I think it's
between
just like you reconciled it, and I think that's one of the big things is like it is true. Like when you say, I actually talked to somebody at the coffee shop today. It's like we were kind of talking about like how they did in their, the
the
whatever
open?
the open, and they're like, did you do it? I'm like, nah, I don't really. I like that, but I don't really want to do it anymore because what I am enjoying, and I think this is one of the things that I'm enjoying. Like, okay, full, like you're coaching me right now. I'm enjoying the aspects of like it really is a little bit more like old. If you ever okay, I found CrossFit in like 2010, right? When it was like Greg Glassman still programming it, and it was like 3 days on,
When they
one
were
day off.
Olympic lifting in Chuck Taylors.
Yeah, 100%. But it was like, hey, practice, like one workout would be like practice a handstand for 30 minutes, and people would be like, all right, this is dope. And like, which is actually good training to some extent. Like we've briefly talked about. But then the next day would be like 5x5 back squats, which a lot of people were just never exposed to that type of stuff. And it was beneficial. You'd do 20 minutes of warming up, you'd do 5x5 back squats, and then you'd be done, right? And then it would be like a Metcon type of thing, right? What CrossFit has evolved into and the class structure is this just like 6 day a week type of beatdown. And a lot of people
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
understand it.
It turns into its own thing with its own trajectory and its own meta.
It's hard because like the guy who started it and his methodologies like are still in there a little bit, but it's just like it's like anything else, like Mark Ripito took like the 3x5 and made it like a novice linear progression when all it really was is just like, it's a good way to train. It'll get you strong, it'll get you good at fives, it'll get you out of the beginner lifting stage if you do it well. But now it's like its own entity, right? So, which is what you're trying to do with this GPP is like, grow it and, which is good. Like, I appreciate that branding.
Well, and that's how I explain to people what I do. I'm like, how I perceive how I train is just high quality strength and conditioning. And that's my brand, general physical preparation. That's a big part of our core values. And that's why I like to overlap these concepts of S&C is just general physical preparation, because going back to that infrasternal conversation we're having where I'm like, it's a useful concept, but people are more than their infrasternal angle. One of my biggest gripes with strength and conditioning is we're so siloed. And I think there's a complete misconception of applying the principle of specificity to the strength and conditioning of athletes who play all these different sports. Again, I understand that we have soccer players. I understand that we have basketball players, but we're all dealing with humans first and foremost. And I think 90% of strength and conditioning demands are the same. Like it is very much just this training general qualities and then practicing your actual sport. Sorry, just to give everyone the full picture, the other half of, I guess, the mission for general physical preparation is I think we're all frustrated, speaking between like myself and you and this community of other people, that the average person's interaction with a personal trainer basically resembles a shitty bodybuilding prep. We have a fat loss centric industry, and don't get me wrong, I'm acutely aware of the obesity epidemic, but I think if we really want to have as much of a shot at having an impact on that as possible, what we need to do is get people engaging with health seeking behavior for the rest of their life. And I think a lot of people do love bodybuilding style training, and I don't want to diminish the impact of how powerful that can be for a lot of people. But I think for a lot of people, they never really get into it. Whereas again, I look at general physical preparation, what I'm trying to promote, through a similar lens to what CrossFit actually did to me. It was this gateway drug into fitness, and I didn't stay with CrossFit. I never really did CrossFit formally, but I don't expect people to necessarily stay with general physical preparation for the whole of their training life. But I hope that it gives people this gateway drug. Like if personal trainers just acted as S&C coaches for the general public, we expose them to more of what training can actually be. And there's a higher likelihood, in my opinion, of them finding a style of training that they will hopefully pursue for a longer period, ideally the rest of their life. I know that might seem a little bit idealistic.
No, I
Sorry, I
think
know
it's
I
good.
sort of changed the end of that question, but just to
No,
contextualize
I think like
PPP and
I
S&C and
like we have kind of these blunt, like pissed off views of how people practice, right? And they're mostly just rooted in like people just making it really like seem certain, like, and it's like really what we want you to do is just like find something that you enjoy and like, like obviously pay me to help you do it, but but no, but like I mean,
so
and
if I
I
can
think
be of
one of the things
assistance.
too, I think like like you really didn't change my program for like 8 weeks, which is good, right? But what happens is like there's like these like, oh, is anything going to change this week? Like the desire for novelty is so high, and then you've made a few little tweaks and it's been beneficial, and I get a lot of people who like I get people who you're trying to feel out who they are, like, because it's okay to seek some novelty or some variety, but like if you're switching up every variable all the time, that's hard. And I think we have kind of just this dichotomy of like, no, training's really boring, or training's just whatever the hell you feel like, right? Or just like, and it's like it's probably somewhere in the middle, which is what most things end up being, right? um
Well, and that's how I view like the biopsychosocial approach to programming. Like it's not just a rehab lens; it's a lens for absolutely everything you do in fitness. And uh, I think what we have an opportunity to do at this point in the industry is strike the balance between exactly those two dichotomies that you were describing. We have the full blown entertainment, like, let's just get in there and do fucking whatever. But then we have this whole other camp, the serious results based camp that's like, no, don't give them what they want, give them what they need. But what they need is something that they want, but it also has to be something that has a relative amount of structure to it. And again, that's why I like what I do and why I think it works so well, especially for the general public, because I think when you're training one quality at a time, that's why we get a lot of people program hopping because they do have that desire for novelty. I think what's good about general physical preparation is you can have some consistency in your weekly structure, but because you have different qualities to train, not only throughout the week, but even within the workout, the idea is that that might scratch that novelty itch while you can still have really productive training. So you've got some plyos in your program, you've got a little bit of conditioning, you get a little bit of a pump after the strength piece. And again, this is just my biases and my preferences, but I think it makes sense to me why a lot of novelty seekers and former program hoppers enjoy this style of training. And then, like I said, just undulating things a little bit up and down on a week to week basis. But yeah, a relatively static style of programming.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think you posted on this like a couple days ago. It's like, hey, I'd rather it's okay to be like mediocre at a lot of things because even the people who get kind of good at stuff, like they're not that great. Right. And like trading for me too, it's like I traded basically like a 500-pound deadlift for like just moving like crap when I went and tried to play rugby. And it's like, could I have just waited a couple more years to probably get that 500-pound deadlift and then like still continue to move relatively well? Like, probably. But that's kind of what happens is like we just chase stuff and want it fast, right? Or we get like, I mean, I gained like 40 pounds before my wedding, and my wife was like, dude, like, because I finally, so just my starting strength, I had run like a linear progression of multiple times, and I had like stalled out at like 275, which, looking back on like stalling out at 275 for 5 at like 175 pounds or, like 85 kilos, whatever that is, not that big a deal, right? Like you just ran that and you need a different stimulus, right? But what I did instead was like, well, I got engaged and I've got my wife on the hook. So now I'm just going to gain 50 pounds and try to squat. And I ended up at like 355 for 5. And I felt like dog crap. Right. And, that's kind of what we do is we like, I remember reading the blue book, which honestly, it's a great training resource, but it's the
Hell yeah.
dogma. Right. And I remember sketching out my 12 or 16 week program and being like just set in stone. And then I would go eat burritos at McDonald's. And then I realized like this wasn't that fun. Like it just was like anxiety inducing and not that fun. And what I think I'm realizing more and more is like having some structure and then having fun in that side of that, like, because we talked about this a little bit, like movement is kind of an anxiety reliever for me. So it's like there's no reason for me not to like go run for 20 minutes if I want to, right? Just go slow and chill out and listen to music, whatever, right? But what are your expectations around that? Like, you think you're going to be the fastest guy in the world and drive up your total in the next 6 weeks? It's like, well, don't do that, right? It's about health seeking behaviors and like managing yourself, right? And I think that's where people get lost is like we see somebody like David Goggins and we're like, I gotta freaking go so hard to make any progress. And it's like, no, you just have to be in the process and have some fun. And like I think that's one of the things I try to convey to like maybe newer lifters is like, hey, whether you get there in the next 8 weeks or the next 16 weeks or the next year, it doesn't really matter as long as you feel good and you're having fun. Because it's gonna come, right? And so that's just an aside, right?
I think a lot of these things stem from the all or nothing mentality. And I think a lot of us these days are aware of it in some aspects of how it can apply to training. But I think one of the blind spots of how the all or nothing mentality affects us is in program optimization. And I've even been guilty of this before. You know, when you have a client who's not getting results and like you're looking through their program adherence, you're like, oh yeah, well, you skipped this set of your accessories, so that's why you're not progressing. And it's like, oh shit, like that's me being one of these optimal fragilistas. Like your training does not require complete optimization to make progress. And the less quote unquote optimal it is, the more you're going to have to change your expectations about the rate of progression. But even for really good progress, like it's never about, like, you cannot have the perfect program. So we need to be honest with people about the bandwidth of what I call good enough programming. And again, that's how we try to manage things. And that is your best shot at optimal programming, because when you, when you say like you're trying to make optimal programming decisions, that is still a reductionist mindset, because you're boiling your whole client's life down to training. Whereas, as you highlighted, it's like you have more needs from exercise than just getting a training stimulus. It's also a part of your mental health care plan. And if we don't integrate that, like you said, you just going for a 5K mental health run right before your big squat day, like your heavy set of fives, that's suboptimal from a training stimulus perspective. But if I don't allow you to do that, then it's like, well, I don't have control over your programming. So I need to build that flexibility in, because ultimately, how I view how we're going to get you to achieve your goals is by getting you to continue with the training process, and by making it work with your life. And like I said, once you're honest with yourself about what you have seen work and the bandwidth of things that you've seen get results, I think it allows you to buy into that flexible approach. And like I said, achieve optimization through collaboration with your client, and auto regulation and a little bit of flexibility, or at least those are things that help me draw those qualities out, rather than thinking of optimization as, I'm the guru coach, I'm going to write out this perfect fucking program, and if you don't stick to it 100%, then that's your fault why we didn't get results. Like, I think that's a huge cop out on the coach's perspective. But like I said, I've done it, so it's not a
No, I
lecture.
mean I've done it too, and the longer you get into this being more of a coach, like because I was a physio, like I still am a physio, and it's like prescribing stuff versus like I literally had a conversation with a guy today who's like, I want to do this, this, and this, and it's different from what you're programming. I'm like, all right, cool, and I just literally just switched it to what he told me he wanted to do, and I'm like, let's see how it goes for a little while. And I'm like, where in the past I would have like tried to rebuttal it and be like, no, 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 like this isn't the way. But like, it wasn't a bad plan, and it's what it's something that he did like 15 years ago and he enjoyed. And it's like, all right, that's probably the number one factor. Is like, did you enjoy it? Does it make sense to you? And it was really, really not that different from what I had programmed. It's just like it was kind of like a reverse pyramid into like a top set, and I just like doing that, and it made me feel good, and it also let me like test things out, right? When it like I think what it man, it's just so much of it is like the all or nothing, but it's also like we want to avoid pain and uncertainty so much that we feel like if I get the right thing and if I don't mess with any of the variables, then I'll be successful. When it's like performance, like I've had good performances where like in the gym where I ran like 2 miles before I came and squatted, and I squatted well, right? And then I also have had shit performances like that too, right? And it's also just weird because like the last 6 or 7 weeks, my front squat kind of felt like dog shit, and you had me do a little bit more high rep work, and then like it started to feel good, and now like I
Flush
feel
it
like
out. Just
yeah, I feel like I know how to front squat again, which I used to do on a regular basis, and then I just done so much low bar and a little bit of high bar work that I just like it wasn't comfortable at all, right? And
Well,
so
and that's it as well. People are so caught up in like the physiological stimulus, because I think I had you mostly doing either twos or threes and fives before that. But a lot of people would be like, "Oh, change it up to tens." It's like now you're chasing a hypertrophy stimulus. I'm like, no, it's still strength, and what we're leaning into also with that higher rep expression, in my opinion, is a little bit more practice. Like that
yeah,
was the intention behind that. Like I'm just gonna let Dave rep this out, and I know he knows how to front squat. He just needs more exposure to that environment and those constraints. And he has, oh, sorry, not for sure, but he has a better shot of working it out.
Well, like the last 3 to 4 set reps of a heavy like set of 10, if you're only doing one, like you're gonna have a little bit of technical breakdown, and it's also just like kind of hard, which I think can translate into
it's
like,
gonna really highlight it to you, like, oh wow, I'm really getting pulled forward. Oh, my knees extend so fucking early when I'm
yeah,
tired.
yeah, and it's like, and it's just that's like the kind of creativity or just the thinking that I do appreciate, and I think that we just need more of. And also just acceptance of like, man, there's a lot of ways to like get somebody better at stuff, right? And which is really cool. All right, so let's go to the gait cycle, because you said before we started recording. What
Oh,
about the gait
actually,
cycle? Oh, go ahead.
you just because you ask good questions and you have good thoughts as you're leading into the questions. It sort of just sparked something that I think was important that you brought up, like just striking a balance between a bottoms up process oriented approach, but then still using, I think my word for it is like tactical top down constraints. So as much as we try to be like, oh yeah, don't predict things, just take each session as it comes, just try your best and we'll see what weights we get on the bar for whatever the RPEs that we're described. Like, I think that can also go too far. And I think you can use tactical top down constraints as motivational tactics to like draw out certain performances throughout the program, because I definitely did fall into what I would call like, the bottoms up, taking it too far and just turning it into a bit of a laissez-faire shit show. Whereas some clients I think of mine were actually seeking a bit more direction and stuff like that. So as much as, on a Friday when you come into the gym, it is just like, yeah, let's just see what sort of shape you're in once you start warming up. Some sessions I will just be like, okay, yeah, as much as we'll take whatever performance comes, it'd be nice of you to hit a PB today. Like,
Yeah.
we're absolutely going for it here. Let's create hey, let's pretend we're a robot for a second. Because and what that came from is just seeing all these people with rigid programs, how some people get such phenomenal results. And like, I do think that there's something to be said for if you're too much of one of those people, like, let's just see what comes. Like, they don't tend to be the best athletes. I'm also that person, but just like we can lean into what we're seeing with those elite performances. It's like, yeah, pretend you're a robot that does linearly progress week to week. Like, that can actually be a helpful belief up until the point that you don't progress one week and then your whole world falls apart. Like, we can't have that happen. But like, hell yeah, believe you're an absolute fucking, your body is a machine.
Dude, I mean, so I like, you follow my stories, and like that expectation effect book is wild, because like I think high level performers do have the expectation that they're going to succeed, right? And then like the difference between like you and me, who are just mediocre like athletes in general, like is like good people also have like a lot of things in their favor, like, and then like, when you do kind of suck, like they can kind of, they're a goldfish, where like my mental midget is like, I'm ruminating on why I suck for 6 or 7 days, and like, so just changing that has been really helpful. And like, but also like, man, I do you follow Jim Wendler,
No,
the
I'm aware of
531?
the guy. 531. Yeah.
Dude, I mean, like, I reread that book
I
because
ran starting strength, but I was aware of 531.
so I
But
love
yeah,
I
when I was scrolling through internet forum cookie cutter programs, that's where I
I
landed.
will say, like, I reread 531 like the last couple days, because I do love like percentage based training is gives people a lot of clarity, right? And especially like the idea of like, hey, make a really modest training max. Like, literally your training max should probably be what you can do for 5 reps, and then like go in and hit like AMRAPs, because AMRAPs like don't give you the sense that you suck because you can't hit a single, right? Like, and and like, and it's funny because there's a lot of an intersection between like you and Will Rattel and Brandon Accardi and Austin Jokum, but then also Jim Wendler, because it's like Jim Wendler's kind of like, you can kind of do, if you have this template, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. You just have to freaking know like what you're trying to do, and then not be like a little bitch about it, right? Like, and if you have a bad day, just move on, right? Where there's a lot of neuroticism in like the powerlifting community or the Olympic weightlifting community. There's a lot of neuroticism in a lot of things, right? But like, some days it is good to just like go in and take what's there, right? But I think the utility of a good program or a good coach is like, all right, you got to ask yourself, hey, am I really not feeling it today, or am I just kind of being soft? and or should I just try a little harder? Right. And like that's kind of it's like, that's like a hard thing to say to people. It's like, well, could you just try it a little harder and see where it's at, and like, but it's also
You can
like,
only hit that button. I reckon you're allowed to hit that button like once a month
yeah,
as the
exactly.
coach. Yeah.
Yeah,
Then you just need
100%.
other options. I love that you touched on neuroticism because, like, my biases towards like a heavily auto-regulated RPE-driven approach, or RPE is one of the methods that I choose to express the principle of auto-regulation through. But one of the things I hate admitting is how much neurotic people struggle with auto-regulated and any prescription where there's room for auto-regulation and where they can just benefit from being told what to do. I just don't. My bias is I don't want to work with neurotic people, and because that's what I was about to go back to before. Because I'm pretty flexible with my one-to-one clients and stuff like that. And as much as I was chastising, or maybe it sounded like I was chastising coaches, if they do have a rigid system, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a rigid coaching system, as long as you're so good with your lead gen that you're getting in touch with the right people, where it's like they're the perfect fit. You're attracting one very specific type of client. But like I said, most people aren't that good at lead gen. So if you actually give a fuck about helping the most people, and you are just going to take whoever comes through your door, well, then you need a very flexible system.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just don't take whoever rolls through my door anymore. So, like, honestly, my system is pretty rigid because I won't prescribe anyone percentage-based training. If they need that level of prescription, I'll just tell them to go work with another coach who does do that sort of thing.
I mean, they
That's
could just
my
go
form of
look at the mic to
flexibility.
share. I have this right here. The mic to share, you got your percentages right here in correlation with your RPE. Like, it's not that hard, people. Just go look at that thing. Like, no, I mean, I think the big thing with when it comes to like trying to get people to use reps in reserve or RPE is like, I'm like, well, I just don't feel like I'm very good at it. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Like, it's
It
fine.
doesn't matter.
No,
It turns out it doesn't matter. Like,
was it
because
pretty hard?
that's like how accurate, even if your coach prescribed an RPE 8 and you hit an RPE 9, it's like, it doesn't mean that RPE 8 was going to be the only stimulative sort of thing. It's like all
Yeah.
we're trying to do is just organize training in a way that makes sense to eke out the most productive hard work.
Yep. Yep. And then
Like,
there's
so
just
once you view
phases.
it as that, you're like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like, how it could matter, like, maybe if you had a competition on Friday, it's like, no, we needed the big performance on Friday. So it is bad that you overshot that Wednesday. But like everything outside that, all we're trying to do is just get you training hard. And when you think of your prescription as that, all of a sudden you don't get as neurotic over those specific prescriptions when you don't have to. Like I said, time and a place for everything.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it really does come down to like know when your competition is and know about how long you need to like take the gas or take your foot off the pedal.
Because if you overshoot, I can react to that and
Yeah.
I can just dial you back next week. Like there's literally no reason for me to get mad about my client overshooting when they're weeks out from comp. If they're overshooting every single workout, then I understand the frustration because you're like, hey man, I have zero control over your training right now. Like you need to hand me the reins to some extent for this to work. But just like, yeah, these random overshoots or undershoots, it's like it's my role as a coach to react to that. That's what we're doing. The reactive approach, like react to what your client's doing. Don't just like stick to the same program and yank on their collar more.
Just keep hammering. I have one girl that I knew for the longest time was just always gonna overshoot. So I just like gave her variations and stuff, and like it worked out well. Like she's still PBing on stuff, and but like
Yeah,
at some
that's it.
point I'm
Because
like,
you doing a 10-second pause in the hole, like I'll use that to rein the load in, right?
yeah,
It's like, yeah,
yeah.
it's like you're still pushing close to failure, but there's no way, in my view of things, that that's generating as much fatigue as like just a straight up heavy single.
Yeah, there is I will make a rehab caveat. Is like if you're telling me you got all sorts of moans and groans and you're having like anxiety attacks, because I do think there's a giant correlation between like the stimulus of on your physical self and then how you go about like it just manifests differently. But like if you're
Yeah,
like I'm
I
feeling
love
like
consistency with
yeah,
injury management. Yeah.
yeah, like it's just like let's just dial it back and feel like you can literally make good progress without feeling like your neck's killing you all the time or whatever, right? Or your low back, because like that's the other thing we don't have to get into this too much, but like,
But then
well,
there's the acute chronic zealots.
yes,
Like
100%.
shout out to Franco and Pellizzeri. Yeah, as much as I literally just said that, as soon as that popped in my head, there's people like, oh no, that guy blew his hamstring because he violated his acute chronic work ratio. I'm like, no, that's not what it means either. Like it was a heuristic. It's not a specific ratio.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's really hard because I even like a post I make today that's like more oriented towards the fact that like there isn't a specific diagnosis that you should be chasing. Like then there is, right? And you're like, oh shit. Like, but most of the time who I'm talking to or trying to talk to is the people who are like chasing like stuff that it just doesn't make sense when you look at the body like it's a car. But then there are
Yeah.
things that do make sense from like a mechanical standpoint. They just usually are also in coupled with like the guy who tore his he ruptured his Achilles at the Super Bowl, hopping around. It's like that wasn't an acute workload type of thing. It just happened acutely, and it was probably just so multifactorial that like it just would blow our brains to try to figure out what was all going on, right?
Yeah. Actually, Jake Tura said something that it didn't really challenge, but helped me reconcile some processes that myself and I think a lot of other, I'm not a rehab pro, but people who consider rehab concepts have been talking about. You know how we have been de-emphasizing the need for specific diagnosis. Because I was asking Jake Tura on the podcast recently about how important he sort of sees it as getting the source of your knee pain diagnosed or your tendon pathology. Like in some cases, does it matter? I know in a lot of cases, it does just come back to the fundamentals of load management and praying for natural history to take over. And he said that something that he noticed, because he does believe that there are a couple of knee pain or tendon conditions where it is helpful and impactful on the treatment plan and also managing expectations to get the diagnosis. But he also felt that there was a pattern in terms of the structures as you go from proximal to distal in the body. He felt that there may be a higher need to get an accurate diagnosis. And the example that he gave was, yeah, he's like, yeah, you think like lower back pain, there's just so much nervous tissue around that area. And then also the public perception of injuries to the proximal structure. And like at the end of the day, it's kind of correct because that's where all your fucking vital organs are. And your back is pretty important. But that it can just, so the treatment is so much more vague. Whereas he felt like, yeah, as you go more distal, there may be a more necessary reason to get an accurate diagnosis because it does impact the treatment a little bit.
I can buy that. And it also like at the end of the day, like it's weird. It's kind of like it's an inversion type of thing. Like the closer it is to like your vital organs, like literally like this stuff, here and here to our waist and maybe yeah, like your pelvic organs, super important to like your survival and passing on your genes, right? But like it's almost like the early warning signs of just like protecting yourself probably
Yeah.
like are a little bit more vague. Whereas
And
like if
like
you
he
got
was
some
saying, like patellofemoral pain isn't gonna like refer up your leg.
no,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? Whereas
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
SI joint shit, like that can just be,
Yeah, I mean,
jeez.
it is. It's like a good point. And I can buy into that a little bit. And I also can buy into that, like certain things specifically do benefit from diagnoses, but also there's a lot of like neuroticism that you can tease out in people depending on how long they've been trying to manage something, right? Like, and what their lifestyle and like all these modifiable factors look like, where it's like, you got a basketball player who's like dealing with knee pain that like not going away and he's like all right like and he's like seems like he's a pretty chill guy or girl like all right we need to figure out what the heck your course of treatment has been, right? And also like just because you don't have a specific diagnosis or you don't need a specific diagnosis doesn't mean that the very like it's not just exercise, right? Like there's
Yeah.
certain mindsets and things around it that I don't do myself a service as well as I could sometimes of like helping people like critically think what's going on or like even just what they're paying attention to when they're moving, right? Because like some people be like, yeah, like I like just using an RDL as an example, like yeah, I get some weird like hip pain when I do it. It's like well, literally like, and this is one of the things I take away from like David Gray is like that dude's like push your ass back so hard, like push your butt back so hard, like that you're like, and it like it'll just definitely change how the movement feels, which can change the perception of pain, right? And just
This is
because
what I don't like about, yeah, the movement nihilists, I'd call them. Like there's movement optimism where you're like, oh, great. Like, we're resilient and all that good stuff. But then I think a lot of people take that as like, oh, well, just fucking move whatever. And, oh, it's, how your deadlift isn't related to your pain. I'm like, yeah, maybe so, but and it's so triggering here. People say like, and the movement should be mostly about the hips because you sound like squat you. But if someone has a sensitive back, and I know that muscle, whatever muscle's working and the sensations, people say there's no like reliable connection there. And I know you're not meant to say this. My personal experience is completely different. If you have a sensitive back, I am going to try to get you to move in a way where you're stretching out the glute and moving about the glutes and the hamstrings as much as possible, because it's my view that if you've got a sensitive back and you're doing some hinging, you'll feel much more comfortable feeling a hell of a lot more sensation in those tissues rather than your back.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an idea that people just aren't interfacing. It's like, yeah, we can use sensation as a tool, and you can give people very specific ways to move without scaring the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Those things aren't mutually inclusive.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And it's definitely like the intersection of top down and bottom up, what you're feeling. Because what you're feeling is always, well, I don't want to say it's always true. Well, how much
No,
it's
but
scary.
it feels like I think we've got too skeptical about that reliability. I am sure that there's someone that could be stretching the shit out of their glutes and hamstrings, like moving as entirely about the hips as possible. Obviously, we know it's going to be lumbar flexion
Yeah.
extension. And again, that's why we have to be open to the idea of like, oh, this isn't working. I am seeing them move completely about the hips, but it's still making their back sensitive. And that's not what we're chasing right now. So
Yeah.
we're going to have to find another option here. But I'm like, man, for a lot of people, it feels really reliable, like I said, in my experience.
Yeah. No, and I think there's also the interesting thing when you start to get into like the neuroscience of some of this stuff is like, is your perception of threat turned up super high, right? And it's like, but
Yes.
your point is still good. Well, if I can get you moving at the hip more, and it makes you just, even if it looks pretty similar, start to feel okay with that, then it's like not that big of a stretch for you to be like, okay, moving in this general way is not bad for me, right? And that can give you some confidence to move forward. And it's just movement strategies, right? And some variability. And there's this, that's really
Yeah.
the thing, dude, is like we could really go down some rabbit holes of like consciousness and like perception and all this stuff. And then it's like I could start making content about that and just get super woo woo. And then I'd have absolutely no one wanting to work with me ever because I'm just like, is it even real? Like, are we in the
Everything
Matrix?
devolves into esoteric nonsense.
Yeah. All right, we were going to talk about the gait cycle, so let's do that. Because I want to hear why you think it's such a great model for like the rest of movement. Because I learned the gait cycle in physio school, physical therapy school, and it was just gait. It was like, okay, mid stance, toe off, like, but you basically took that and it's like that ground up type of, all right, this is how it relates to other things, right? And I think that is a useful construct.
Okay, so it's my belief that all movement is gait. And I think people get confused between gait and locomotion.
Okay.
So all locomotion is gait, not all gait is locomotion. Uh, Heavy bilateral squats are still an expression of gait. It's just how we produce force in the closed chain. Or if you're looking for a gait cycle reference to that, that would be what they call stance. So again, the most stereotypical form of gait that we all think about is locomotion or walking around. And I think that that had a huge impact on how certain structures, I guess, developed in our body. And then there's just certain patterns to how we move. Because I think more globally speaking, there's this perception that movement is complex in the fitness industry and in strength and conditioning, just in coaching movement in general. But my belief is that viewing all movement through the lens of gait really simplifies that into just these wind up and overcoming patterns. Or you could also express it as open chain movement and closed chain movement. I just think that there's certain distinctive patterns to that, and it helped me reconcile a lot of what I was seeing. At least, especially at the time, like my main interest in terms of human movement or sport was Olympic weightlifting, and no one in Olympic weightlifting could reconcile the double knee bend, like how that was useful, because the thought process in weightlifting was the goal is to triple extend as hard and as much as possible to complete that triple extension and then get under the bar. So why is the double knee bend a part of that? Whereas if you talk to someone who, one of those gait nerds who hates lifting weights, like, oh, lifting weights isn't functional. But if you showed them a video of someone doing a heavy clean and jerk, they would not be surprised at the double knee bend. They'd be like, oh, it's mid stance. Oh, they're just knee bending their way through hip extension. And another one, sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean,
And
this
go
is
on.
one of the things I take away. I don't want to stop you right there, but like it's
No,
just
no.
maintaining balance, right? Like of the system, right?
Center of mass and base of support. Yeah, there's
I
only
mean,
so many shapes you can make.
yeah,
They are infinite, but you can sort of identify some I guess borders and constraints to that. And that's the other thing as well. So like you see, we'll get into the whole knees in thing later because that's like a part of it as well. But one of the key frustrations I had, so there was this double knee bend thing that the gait cycle really reconciled for me. The way people just we knee bend, there's a proximal to distal extension pattern when humans are producing force efficiently. The reason for that is this is something that sort of Franz Bosch talks about. Larger muscles, the trade off with those is they need more time to contract and produce all that force. Whereas, and the idea is that typically our larger muscles are more proximal, like big ass, and then you've got the quads, and then you've got the ankle extensors and things like that. But as you go more distal, the muscles get a little bit weaker typically. But then the trade off is that they can contract and relax a lot quicker. And again, like you see these really efficient movers and they all have this whip-like quality to them. And it is just that proximal to distal extension pattern. But like you were alluding to, if you're a little bit uncoordinated in whatever environment or context you're in, and you're not able to efficiently manage your center of mass within your base of support very intentionally, you might sort of fall out of this really efficient pattern. And again, like I said, just not be as efficient of a mover, basically just getting yanked forward by the weight,
yeah,
or in an unloaded athletic scenario, just by gravity, like just not being able to make the right shapes at the right time. And again, you can boil all that down to like, oh, just coordination. Oh, people will do that naturally if you just give them the chance to do that. But I think a lot of our frameworks for coaching coach these qualities out of people deliberately.
yeah,
Again, that being, athletes in tasks where there's a force production component, but also a rhythm and timing component, won't always complete triple extension. And a lot of coaches will see that as inefficiency. They're like, oh, you're not producing as much force as you could have. But the reason why the athlete wasn't intuitively doing that was based on the timing and the rhythm constraints of the task. So, two examples of those that I can point to is in sprinting. Most really efficient sprinters, especially in the upright phase of running, they won't fully triple extend the limb when they're putting force into the ground. So the trade-off is you're not spending as much time producing that force into the ground. But what you were able to do is start cycling the leg quicker, because sprinting, it's about putting force into the ground, but it's also about being able to strike the ground with momentum. So not fully triple extending allows athletes to emphasize that frequency and hitting the ground with momentum more. In a weightlifting context, athletes that don't triple extend as much, what the trade-off is there is they won't pull the bar as high. But weightlifting isn't a competition of pulling the bar as high as possible. There's a part of it where you actually have to get under the bar. So what a lot of athletes are maximizing when they don't complete their extension is they're maximizing the time where the bar is still traveling up and they're getting under it. So a lot of those lifters who are really elite, they'll just seem really snappy and efficient and almost like they're teleporting under the bar. And we can identify and give out some examples of those athletes if people are curious about looking for them.
no, there's like two just like mental models that keep coming up into my brain. So like the first is it's not even a mental model, it's just a quote. It's like Thomas Sowell being like there's no trade-offs, or no, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
I think,
economics.
yeah, and I mean, like, dude, this is why I think I was drawn to you, is because you draw models from other places, right? And like that's what I think is cool, because like it is, people get really rigid into like this is how you coach this, right? And it's like, yeah, like that works, but
Yeah. Or
also
like,
like,
I'm a meathead. I'm a strength coach. What do I need to know about the gait cycle? Or I'm just a personal trainer. Why should I care about Nassim Taleb's views on economics? And
yeah, well, and I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes like making weird throws. Like nobody coaches that dude
Yeah.
to throw like that. Like that's not how you're supposed to, like it's not good mechanics. But then the other thing is just like, okay, I've been tinkering around with the idea of like inversion, right? Which is Charlie Munger is the guy who's like, just invert what you want, right? So instead of like, okay, what is a really good I want to be a really good Olympic lifter, right? It's like, okay, well, what does that entail, right? Well, what? And then he's like, instead of doing that, what does a really bad Olympic lifter do,
Is
right?
that
Or
where
what is,
Nassim Taleb got the anti-fragile philosophy? Because again, it's like not how can I optimize this system, not what's the perfect intervention, but what are the things that will make me fail this task? He's just
I think a
inverting
lot
as
of
well.
people in that, like in the like actual not that are like not trained economists, because I do listen to a lot of like Charlie Munger and Nassim Taleb, and like I mean Nassim Taleb was like a trader, right, which is just a lot different than being like an economist, because their models, like they use models and then like they ascribe to a certain model and belief system, and then they probably don't challenge it after a certain point, right?
But there's so many people in fitness now talking about things like dynamic systems theory, talking about complex systems, but still completely blind to all the other people who've been problem solving for complex dynamic systems for fucking millennia before we were trying to work out how to do bicep curls good. Like, we're the idiots. We've got so many smart people who have just decades, no, centuries of wisdom just sitting there waiting for us. We're like, no, but it's fucking just fitness people, man. And again, there's brilliant people in fitness, but most of the brilliant people in the world that have been complex solving for complex dynamic systems aren't in fitness. But and everyone's been like, oh, it's a principle driven approach. It's a principle driven approach. Your principles, therefore, should come from outside of fitness.
Yeah.
Again, we have fitness principles like no, even specificity applies to things outside of fitness. Even
Yeah.
progressive overload applies to things outside of fucking fitness. So I
Yeah.
guess we're coming up with some of our own that transcend fitness as well. But most of these the good principles that I draw from, they come from outside of fitness.
Well,
Can I talk about my
what are you gonna say?
Oh, I just because one of them specifically that I don't think enough of people are aware of in the fitness industry. I think it's time for it is just viewing what we do as equal parts art and science, because
Oh
I
yeah.
think the science is sort of helping us understand that we're in a qualitative field, but like that's just to me saying we need to learn into the artistic side of things, like viewing what we do as an art form, because that inherently makes the field people view our tools as more flexible.
Well,
And then that's how you meet the individual where they're at, right? By
it's just
being
a
up by who
recognition
can, yeah,
of the biopsychosocial lens, because art is emotional and science
yeah,
is supposed to be like the data component of that, right? But
exactly.
like why does anybody go lift weights? Because like it
Yep.
makes them feel good, right? Or like, like it's really it's we do these things and we want these we everything comes from this lens of I want to feel a certain way, right? Even like you look at a really like structured bodybuilding program and you run it like to the T for 8 weeks, like could you have gotten the same results if you would have just done some improv and some jazz,
But
some
that no, but that and yeah, like you said, that's playing classical music, and that's cool. And some
yeah.
people are into that, and it's exactly
Yep.
what they want their art to be. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Art is the flexible application of the scientific principles of training. The same way that jazz is still underpinned by all the mathematics of music, and they're still thinking about a scale. They're just playing deliberately out. But
Yeah.
what contextualizes them playing out is the fact, sorry, that there was a scale to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, and that's so,
Sorry, just and further to that, what I was trying to highlight before, I guess I didn't have the words to express, the people who don't fall down these rabbit holes and are fitness nihilists, they're the people who are playing jazz, but their jazz sucks because they don't even know how they're playing out.
I feel like that's me sometimes, but I'm also
No,
having
it's all of
fun.
us.
I mean, it's all, yeah, it's all of us. I mean, I think
Dude, good
like,
jazz is so high level. I'm sitting here as a guy who's been training for like only just getting to like 10 years of like actually coaching people, being like, yeah, I'm playing sick jazz. It's like, no, it takes a lifetime to really play out well.
Well, and I think that's one of the. I mean, so we saw a jazz concert this weekend. It was really cool.
Oh,
And
nice.
like I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew they were like improving and they doing like things. And my wife was like in awe, and my mother-in-law is a piano player and was thinking it was really cool. And I think like what we want to do is like arm people with the ability to make like good decisions, but like also not be like I need to tell you what decisions to make, right? And like I think when what I'm always thinking about or trying maybe to try to help people do is like you can do we gotta kind of know what you want to do within reason, and then just realize that like good results or health seeking behaviors are like it's why I like the concept of inversion. It's like people don't necessarily know what they want, but they do know what they don't want, which is usually to be like really obese and not be able to move.
Too big.
Yeah. Man, so many people like think they're gonna turn into a bodybuilder after like, like just that narrative is still so big. Like I had a lady, she's like, I just don't want to get too big. I'm like, okay, like Brenda, you're deadlifting 65 pounds here. I love you. I'm glad you're doing it, but just don't worry about that. Like just
Yeah.
keep walking. But it
I
does
do
help.
enjoy telling younger women now, though. It's just like you might get big, actually, and it's
Yeah.
up to you to decide if you have a problem with that now.
And I think that's fine too. I think we got yeah, the narrative of like you're not gonna get big from strength training did for good reason get called into
Like there
question
are
because
some
there are
jacked
women.
women out there.
Yeah, there's some women who are just like they just get jacked fast, and like I'm like, damn, that's not me. I wish that was me. But I think what it is just like there, and short form content is probably not the way to do this, right? Which we both kind of know, but like we are putting some nuance into stuff, and then you get people who like will come at you, which is why I think it's kind of hard. There's a lot of people who would probably have good takes that don't post because they're afraid of like that, or they just don't post enough to actually create like their own like narrative or their own story. But like what helped you? I mean, I think a lot, I kind of know the answer, but like what helped you to like, all right, I need to be on social media. I need to
It's
have
the
my
most
own hot
loaded
takes.
question ever.
What like what when you create content or when you're trying to like because it really is, it's hearts and minds. It's propaganda. Like
Yeah.
what drives your propaganda, or how do you go about making content?
I just have a set of principles for everything. And the thing why people struggle with this is the same why people struggle with their training because they lack a principle-driven approach. So the reason why I'm feel more comfortable expressing myself through what may seem and what may rightly so be deemed vapid hot takes on social media platforms like Instagram, really short form content. It's really good for grabbing people's attention. That stems from the work of Marshall McLuhan, like his sort of teachings around the medium is the message. Oh, and also further to that, something else he said. Um, oh god, this might get off the rails in a second. Marshall McLuhan is famous for saying, "There's no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew." Uh, and I'm interpreting this a lot. So I'm pretty sure Marshall McLuhan was a gay man, and he got persecuted a lot for that. Sorry, maybe like I think there was like rumors about it, or maybe for sure he was, or something like that. And I think what he was sort of alluding to there is that like a lot of people have been persecuted. Sorry, not just that, sorry, but a lot of people just haven't been listened to over the course of history, whether it was the race that they were, or the gender they were, or their position in society, and how much further ahead we'd be as a species if everyone had an equal and democratized way of sharing their views on things. Um, because what are the odds that only the elite privileged classes have had all the good ideas and the ability to shape the world. And I apply that lens also because I have a principle driven approach to us in the fitness industry. But we're lucky enough to all share these social media platforms, and people talk about that like it's a bad thing. They're like, oh, any idiot can share their opinion on these platforms, and they're right about that. But that's not the problem. The problem is like we talk about that Dunning-Kruger effect. It's like all the idiots are so quick to share their opinions, and it's all the more intelligent, considered people that are more constrained, and they don't want to interact with a platform like social media because it constrains their messaging, and it doesn't work well when you use a lot of nuance. And And when you go into a lot of detail, how I reconcile and overcome that is it's important for me to show up as someone who truly believes that I do have good opinions on this stuff that need to be heard by the world, because it's my belief that everyone's opinions on this topic should be heard. And that if everyone participates in that, we'll be left with at least a better platform than what it currently is. And it also, for me, in my model, it doesn't end at short form content creation. I'm not just doing it. Sorry, I am doing it for attention, but there's a very specific intention behind why I'm showing up to this platform daily to try to grab people's attention. And that's because I do believe in nuance and I do believe in longer format conversations, which is exactly why I'm here today on your podcast. So, my goal with short term content creation is to use it to grab your attention and then to take you away to a more nuanced platform, whether it's my mentorship, if I can sell that to you, whether it's my coaching services or my programming, if I can sell that to you, or maybe at the very least, I can just convince you to listen to my podcast, because a podcast is a less constrained format. Or maybe if you're someone who wants to be a nuanced content creator, you can use social media as your platform to shout off, and then you can have your YouTube channel. You're not constrained on YouTube. You can make a 90-minute video. You can get as nuanced as you fucking want, and people are going to eat that shit up because that's what people are there for.
Yeah.
So to turn this into a fucking rant as well, because smarter and better coaches need to take some fucking responsibility and like actually learn to respect the medium. Again, going back to Marshall McLuhan speaks about the medium is the message. So coaches get frustrated because they want to write like it's academia, and then no one wants to fucking listen to them on social media. If people were interested in writing like that, they'd be on fucking PubMed, but they're on social media after a big day of fucking work. So how about you fucking drop the nuance and you churn out some vapid hot takes for those people, entertain the masses so you can build trust and grab attention, and then take them away to some longer form content. And then you've earned the right to get into the fucking nuance. Stop just writing out this boring bullshit and then bitching about the algorithm and the state of the fitness industry.
Oh yeah. I gotta go buy my wife dinner because
Sorry.
there's a reason. But we
That
we
was
will
so
have to do this again in the not too distant future. I'll book like a 3 hour long time slot for it, because
I
like
can
just rant. But no, I think it's important, and I do appreciate it, because I like honestly, and I'll just like I've been a little like, for a few different reasons, like a little low energy like the last couple weeks. Like creating content that like is authentic to you is hard, right? Like you can kind of like I literally went to the coffee shop today and the well was kind of dry, and then I'm like, all right, just start writing shit down, right?
It's the war of
And
art, baby.
yeah, and which is a
Same as
great
when you
book.
show up to the gym, you're like, my legs are kind of fucked. Then you're like, I'm gonna crank out some warm-up sets.
Have you read this book
Yes.
before?
No, I
Yeah.
haven't, but someone told me the title. I was like, I know it's a good book
Dude,
already.
I'll figure out how to send it to you. I know you're in Australia,
Uh,
but I'll figure out how to send it to you. But it's incredible. It's Stephen Pressfield's awesome. He wrote like a great book on like the Battle of the 300. It's
It's such a
really,
horny title as well.
oh yeah. I mean, it's he knows what he's doing, and it's this
Yeah.
is totally one of those, like, it's like, each page is like a motivational thing, which I'm kind of a motivational fanboy, right? But like,
Oh, I didn't realize it was like that.
yeah, it's not
That's
like a
sick.
how to do anything. It's like, just realize that you're
Just to
coming up
wind you
against
up.
your resistance, like the resistance inside of you, that's like, and you got to find your muse. And it's awesome. Like it's a dope book. But I think like it's man, it's hard to find your authentic self, and then can let it continue to evolve, because you're gonna have haters pop up like when you're kind of on your first iteration of that, right? Or you're gonna have, like, we can talk about them. We're not going to on this
You're
episode.
actually not. They're all internal. We spoke about this in the mentorship. No one gives about no one
Yeah,
gives a
no,
fuck about your content
no,
and stuff.
nobody really does, right? And like, even, I mean, we can talk about, like, we'll talk about this more, but like Squat You, he's telling his story, and people like his story, right? And if you get mad about his story, you know what you got to do? You got to go get better at telling your own story, right? And like,
Yeah,
that's
that too, but also specifically, you hit the send button and then there's the download icon, and then you react to it. You post it on your own fucking page. His content and his videos are hyper optimized for the algorithm, so he's doing all the hard real editing work for you. You just chop in your little sassy responses,
there you go,
and
man.
then you fighting the good fight. But
There you
more
go.
so what Dave said. Dave had a better point. Mine was very catty.
No, he does have. I mean, his video editing is set up really well. Like, I mean, he's like, we can get into I read something the other day, and it's like the best story wins, right? And what he does is he creates a very clear narrative about how to solve these problems that are a lot of people perceive, right? And man, there's just so much more opportunity and options available to people from a biopsychosocial from lens that like that's what I get butthurt about is like
But and this is evidence-based people as well. Like we think that we're just there for the facts and the data, but it's like no. The only thing we're human at the end of the day. We all need a story to sell us any bit of information, and the sooner you accept that and you come to terms with that, rather than just living in denial about it. Okay, it's not just idiots. It's also it's everyone.
all of us. Yeah. Yeah. All right, dude. This is fun. I appreciate you. I'm not gonna get my training in today because I'm going to buy my wife dinner and but I
Hell
might get
yeah. No,
I
that
might
facilitates the training process
100%. Yeah.
in the long
I'm
run.
too neurotic sometimes, so it's kind of good for me to miss a work. Well, I'm not gonna miss it. I'm still gonna get it in the rest of this week, but no, appreciate you. Angus Bradley 92 on Instagram, is that correct?
That's it.
What is your podcast called?
It's called the High Performance Podcast, but if you just everything comes through my
Yeah,
Instagram,
it
that's
does.
the
Yeah,
top
go
of the
do that.
funnel.
Your mentorship honestly was a lot of fun and a really good resource, so I highly recommend that. But I appreciate you, and we'll do this again sometime.
Appreciate you, Dave.
Take it easy, buddy.